Welcome back. We're going to start painting our spring lettering, and I'm going to mix up a green value using the Indian yellow, and I'm using a palette knife to mix in a little bit of the phthalo blue. As I lid my brush, I'm going to pick up a little white because I want to lighten this mix a little bit. And at this point you can see a little bit more of the color, and if you want it to be a more yellow-green, add a little more Indian yellow. And for my piece, I would like it to be a little bit bluer, so I'm just going to pick up a little bit more phthalo blue and brush mix that in. Then we're going to paint in each of the letters of the word spring, and you just want kind of a flat color, medium value green to do this. I'm using a small brush that's maybe like a number 4 flat, and I find that easiest to paint these letters in because I can use it flat to fill in the wider part of the letters, and if I want a narrow one, I just kind of run it up on the chisel edge to get a more narrow line. But you can use any type of brush that you're more comfortable with. You don't have to use the flat. You may feel you'd like to use a round or maybe a filbert or something, but use what's comfortable with you. But like I said, I find it easiest to use a flat that's about the width of the letters that I want. And just going to color book these letters in. They don't have to be perfectly smooth. Get as smooth as you can. We're going to just do this one coat because we'll be adding some shading and highlighting later. Okay, with the same green mix, we're going to continue on and paint the grass under the basket. To do this grass, I'm using a medium Traditions Dome Blender. This is a synthetic brush that's round and has a kind of a bullet tip, which makes it real nice for doing soft blending. I use it a lot for scrubbing in colors or dry brushing, and also for stippling or stenciling. As we're working this grass color in, you can pick up some different colors to vary the color of the grass. I picked up a little bit of the Indian yellow to create some areas that were more yellow-green, pick up more of the dark value to keep it dark, add a little bit of white, and you can add some highlights. So we just are kind of going for just kind of a variegated mottled look that is soft and kind of grass looking. Okay, I think I got a little bit too much white, so we can always work some other colors over that as it starts setting up to bring it back to a little darker value. We're going to pull it out along the sides, kind of taper it off before you get to the edges of the board. And then we're going to work it down close to where the lace cut work will start, and we'll eventually kind of blend it into the shading there, but for right now we just want to bring it down close to where that's going to be, so that when we add our shadows to the top of the lace work, it'll kind of blend into the grass. But you can see here I've gone back and added some darker green into those really light white areas I had to give them a little bit more shadows. And I'm putting some yellow down here along the bottom edges to give it a warm golden green color. So just, you can just vary the colors, something that you find pleasing. If you want it lighter, just add more white. If you want it darker, keep more of your base mix. Okay, we're back again after filling in some missing flower, and we're going to darken the background behind the daisies in the basket. We put just a rough stippling behind these flowers before we painted them, but now that they're in, I feel like we need to add a little bit more definition and give some darkness to them. So we're going to fast forward now. So as I do this, we're just using the green mix, plus a touch of raw umber. Next, we're going to finally outline all the daisy petals and leaves with a mixed black. I do a black mix using phthalo blue, some raw umber, and you can add a touch of naphthol red. This won't be a true black, but it'll be more of an organic black that you can kind of tint to the direction that you want. If you want it more blue, add more phthalo blue. If you want more brown to it, you add some more raw umber, and the red sort of neutralizes it. So I'm using a very fine, like 10 or 20 odd liner brush, and add a little bit of water into the mix and work right up on the tip of your brush, almost perpendicular to your surface. And you want to keep these lines very fine and sketchy. They don't need to perfectly follow every edge of your painting. It's really prettier if you let it break here and there and just keep it very loose. So I'm going to paint along, and we'll fast forward this in a minute so that you don't have to sit here and watch me paint everything. You can pause your video, or after it gets to the fast forward, if you're not finished with your lining, just take a break and pause the video and then start it up when you're ready to go to the next step. Our next step is to highlight the right edges of the letters in the word spring with a float of white. I'm using a small number 4 flat, which I'm side loading with white. And to side load, I'm just, wetting the brush with some water. You don't want too much water, just enough to make the paint flow. Tip the corner in white and spread it out on your palette. And then we're going to go along and paint the right side of each piece of the letter with white. To add some additional colors into the basket, we're going to float some orange onto the basket weave. I'm making a nice bright orange using the Indian red and a touch of Naphthol red, and I'm blending together on the palette as I'm loading my floated brush. We're going to float these highlights mainly on the edges of the basket weaves and probably a little more towards the center of the basket than the edges. I'm also doing some up here along the basket rim. You want to keep this color nice and sheer, not too solid, and so that your golden undercolor shows through. And this is just going to pick up and add some of the highlights, some accents from the colors in the ladybugs and the daisy centers into your basket. And repeating these colors throughout your design help the whole design mesh together so the color flows through your design. You can just kind of put some in, look at your, step back and look at your design, and if you feel like you need to add more, you can add some little touches here and there. It doesn't have to be on every basket weave. Probably about, I'm doing them maybe on about 3/4 of them. Some are in the highlights, some are in the shadows. Secondly, we're going to add some feather accents to the basket, and these are going to be primarily in the shadows of a purple mix, and that's going to be the phthalo blue plus some of the Naphthol red light. And again, I'm just brush mixing them together as I'm loading my brush to side load. And again, side loading is, you start with a little more than damp brush and add some paint to the corner of your brush. Brush it out on your palette so the paint kind of spreads partway across the flat of the brush. You don't want it all the way to the edge that has clean water. And then I pick up the second color and brush mix in the same track, stroke it, and the two colors will merge together. So here we're getting kind of a soft purple, and you can see that I'm floating it into the shadows under the rim on the, along the outside of the basket. And again, this picks up some of the purple colors that we've used in the daisy petals to shade them, the blues we have in the butterfly. Again, just repeating your colors throughout the design. We're going to add some highlights to the basket by dry brushing with white. And I'm using the Traditions Dome brush. There's a lot of other brushes that are similar. There's a Royal makes one called a Sable Tech Round that's real nice, and Sharp has some natural bristle round brushes. But you want one with a kind of a rounded tip, and that gives you a nice side-loaded edge. You can see here I've got a little too much paint in my brush, so I'm getting a little bit of a patch of the white. You want to really make sure that paint is distributed in your brush and you don't have any clumps on it, because this is what will happen if you have too much paint to start with. So be sure to really work that brush on your palette. So now, or you can brush any excess off on a paper towel. So I'm just in a circular motion, just scrubbing in some of this white to the center of each of the basket weaves, and you can see it gives a highlight to that, so it's real soft. We'll go back and correct the ones that we've got the little patch of in a few minutes, but you're going to do this all over each of your basket weaves and do some on the rim of the basket. And if it gets too chalky, we can always also go back and put a wash of the yellows over the white so that the light still shows through, but it softens the white down a little bit too if you get too much. When you're doing this type of dry brushing, you want to make sure your brush starts out bone dry. You don't want any water in it. If you have water in the brush, if you've cleaned it, the water will wick down and make a wash of your paint rather than this soft dry brush effect. So, you know, if I'm using a brush like this to dry brush in between, I never wash it in water. I'll use like a hand sanitizer to clean the paint out of the brush and dry it well on a paper towel, and the alcohol and the hand sanitizer will evaporate real quickly, so you can reuse the brush without waiting for it to dry like you would if you had to if you had used water in it. When I get to the point that I really think the brush is working, doing a really nice dry brush, it almost comes off like a powder. You'll have a powder on your surface that you'll have to brush away. Here I'm going to try to soften out those spots where I got a little bit too much white paint in it. I'm just going over it with a dry brush of some of the raw sienna in the brush that kind of merges with the white and softens those patches down, so you can see they're much softer now. So just go back and forth in layers. You know, you can go, it's better to start with just a little bit, and you can always build up layers rather than trying to get too much at one time. We're going to add a little tack to the basket rim with a gray mix of the black mix plus a little white mixed into it. Our black mix was the phthalo blue, some raw umber, and a touch of naphthol red, and then just add a little bit of the white and you'll get a gray. We're just going to make a paint in a little circle, little filled in circle on at the center of the rim. You can see we're kind of jumping around from detail to detail as we continue on. We're going to go back and do some highlighting in the grass, and I'm just again using the Dome blender and dry brushing in some white to the grass to give a little bit more highlight. You can add as little or as much as you want. The next thing we're going to do is start shading our lace along the bottom rim. We want to give it some dimension, so we're going to go along the top, and I'm floating some raw sienna along the top edge of where I want that lace to look like it's appliqued onto this plaque. So I'm using like a 3/8 or a 1/4 inch angle brush to do the float, some raw sienna, and we're just going to float this little scalloped edge all the way across. On this first coat, you don't have to worry about it getting it too dark. Just, get the scallops positioned in, and we can always go back after this layer has dried and add a second float on top of it to deepen the color. I never worry about trying to get my floats as dark as I want them on the first go round. So just a couple more little scallops here to do, and you can see how this is giving a lot more dimension to the bottom laser cut area of this panel. My idea is to have it look sort of like Battenberg lace when we're finished. To give some shading to the cutouts, I'm going to float some raw sienna, maybe about 1/8 of an inch little edge on the left side of the plaque on each cutout. And you're going to do that until you get over to the middle, and then we're going to flip and do the opposite side. So again, we're just doing raw sienna float, maybe 1/8 of an inch wide along the left and bottom edge of each cutout. On this middle row, I'm going to do it more just on the bottom edge so that it's kind of the dividing line between the left and right sides. So you can see when we get to the circle, we're going to start about halfway down, come around the bottom, and then come up on the right side. And you can go back over some of these if they need to be darkened a little bit. On the right side, we're going to flip over and do the shading to the right side of the cutout. But I think you can see, now that you can see the left side, this adds a lot more dimension to these cutouts. They don't look so flat. So just continue on and shade the right side of each of the little shapes with a float of raw sienna. Now we're going to switch and build up some highlights on the lace with white. I just cleaned my little angle brush and side loaded it with the titanium white or opaque white, and we're going to float along the top edge of these scallops right up against the shading that we had put in earlier. And again, this may take a couple of coats, so don't worry if it's not as bright as you'd like it to be on the first go round. When you're doing floating like this, you do want to make sure that each layer is totally dry before you go over it with a second layer, because if you have any areas that are partly dry and partly wet, the wet areas will pick up on the second layer and you'll get a real uneven, almost like a hole in your floated color. As long as your float's still wet, you can kind of go over it a second time, but if you've got any spots that are partly dry and parts that are wet, just stop and wait till they're totally dry before you put a second layer. Again, you can see it, as we're adding this highlight at the top, this is just making this more dimensional looking, almost like there is an overlay on the banner, that the bottom is, an extra piece that's been layered on top. Like an applique, or just even like a second layer of wood. You sometimes see some wood pieces that are cut out with multiple layers to give dimension, but we're getting this by just doing some shading and highlighting and some basic colors. So I'm going back and repeating some of the floats just because I'd like them a little bit stronger. Some of them are more transparent than others, and I'd like a little bit heavy coverage of the white. Okay, now we're going back to our dome brush and loading it with white. Again, we don't want any clumps of paint, and we're going to scrub this dry brushed white in between all these cutouts. Again, just to add some more highlights and give this whole lace section more dimension. Just add more white paint to your brush as you need to. As you start scrubbing, the paint comes off, and you can tell when it starts, you're not getting much residue coming off the brush, that it's time to reload. But you can just keep going back over and over by reloading the brush and going back over areas to build up the highlight as much as you want. This really tires my arm out. You can build muscles doing this. think we've almost got enough done, so we'll do this a little bit more, and then you can always decide later if you want to come back and repeat any. Okay, we're going to go back to our tack that should be dry by now, and we're going to shade along the left side of the tack with raw umber. And this is, we're shading the basket rim, not the tack itself. So you're shading on the rim right up against the tack on the left side. So it's going to be like a little cast shadow from the tack. And then we're going to highlight the right edge of the tack, and this is on the tack, with just a little touch of white to give it a little reflection like the light's hitting it. So we're again using our tiny little angle brush, side load it with some white, and just touch that right edge of the tack. We're going back to our letters now and adding some shading on them. And you can see I'm skipping around in the design. This is just to let certain areas dry before we go back and work on them. And we're going to do this just the opposite of the highlights. We're going to float the left side of the letters, and we're going to use the green mix that we started with, plus a little more phthalo blue to make it a little darker. So the green mix was the Indian yellow plus a little touch of phthalo blue, and we're going to add some additional phthalo blue just to make this a little darker. You're going to go along and float the left edge of the letters opposite of where you have your white highlighting. We're going to shade our butterfly wings and the bee's wings with a wash of phthalo blue plus a touch of raw umber. This will make a dirty blue. We're using a small angle or flat, and I'm actually adding just a touch of the naphtha red to it to give it a little bit more of a purpley look. And we want to separate the butterfly wings so that that front wing pops forward a little bit. So we're shading below it and now just above it on the other wings. And we're also going to do that on the bee's wings. You want to keep this real nice and sheer. And we're just going to do a little float where that back and front wing touch so they separate, and you can see one makes one come forward and one stay behind. And now we're going to finally outline the remainder of the design like we did around the flowers and the leaves with the same black mix, which was phthalo blue, raw umber, and a little bit of the naphtha red light. And the outlining is going to be on the lettering, any of the detail that you want to bring out. You can do the bee wings, the basket. I think we've already done the ladybugs and things, but any place that you haven't done outlining yet and want to give a little more definition, to the design, you can outline at this point. We're going to add some accents around the edges of the board. And to do this, we're going to brush on some glazing medium with a clean brush. And then you're going to work some colors in to this glazing medium to keep them nice and soft and transparent using the Dome blender. And first I'm going to use kind of a purple mix that's some of the phthalo blue plus some of the Naphthol red light. And if you want it more blue, again, add more blue to the mix. And if you want it a little bit more of a red violet, add a little more Naphthol red light. Just putting a very little bit into this and just very lightly working it out into that clear glazing medium to soften it. You move to another section of the board, again add some additional glazing medium and then scrub some of that color in. We're going to again do purple down here on the bottom right and just soften that out. You want to be sure that you put your glazing medium in a bigger area than where you're going to put your color so that you can just really fade that out to nothing. So you're going to go from a little bit of paint in the glazing medium out to just a clear glazing medium. Add some more glazing medium to a new spot, and you can see I'm working it from the edge all the way over to the flowers. And again, I'm going to repeat some of this purple by scrubbing that in. And because we really don't have very much paint in the brush, you can really keep that soft and use your fingers or whatever to scrub those edges out so they blend into the sand colored background. Once you want to change colors, clean your Dome blender with some of on a paper towel. You can use a little bit of hand sanitizer. And we're going to again add some clear glazing medium to our background and pick up a different color. This time we're going to go with a little bit of an orange, which is your Naphthol red light, and some of the Indian yellow. Scrub that into your glazing medium. And you can see this just gives a real nice soft tint to the background that adds accents, picking up the colors of your design. I like this one a little bit redder, so I'm going to pick up a little bit more of the Naphthol red light and work that into it so it's a brighter red-orange. And then pick up maybe a little yellow, and so you have some variation. We're going from red-orange more over into a yellow-orange. And I add some of this yellow color down at the bottom left. If you want to smudge it a little bit more with your fingers. And now this area I'm not going to add a whole very wide area, so I'm just going to almost scrub it in with a little bit of glazing medium in the brush. That works also if you're doing a smaller area. You can see how adding these colors around your project really frame it in. Pick up the colors of the design, repeat them in the background, and it just gives a lot more interest to that background so that it's not just that plain sand color. Next, I'm going to float some white under the butterfly's body. You know, this will make it pop out from the background a little bit more. And again, just using maybe a 3/8 inch angle brush and side loading with the white and just float that softly underneath. And then we're going to add some little trails behind the bees. I'm going to switch to a small round brush, and you want to just pick up a little bit of white. Don't want it too solid, and it's more of a dry brush, and just do some little curly, like little trails where the butterfly's been flying. These are just a little whimsical touch to the background. You want them to be a little more dry brushy, not too solid. And they're pretty and more graceful if you make them curved. Kind of like little curlicues. I want to soften this transition between the grass and the lace, where we left that little bit of a gap where the green grass stopped and the lace started. So I'm going to use the Dome Blender and scrub in some of the raw sienna to deepen those shadows down there, so that we don't have just a abrupt stop between the grass and the shading. So just work that raw sienna right across there. Then you can go back and pick up a little bit of the green and work that into the bottom also, to blend that into the raw sienna so it's a soft transition. You can also use this opportunity to add a little more variation in your grass color. Add some, if you got too light, you can go back and add a little darkness back in so it gives it a little bit more texture. Okay, I want to soften the highlighting on the basket a little bit. I felt like it got a little too chalky looking. So I'm going to go back and with some Indian yellow plus a little touch of white, just dry brush some of that over the highlights so that they go back to a little bit more of a golden look, and lose a little bit of that whiteness. I'm also trying to further fix that little spot where I had that patch of white when we first started dry brushing, so I'm tapping some of that raw sienna or yellow back into that area and reestablishing the highlight. Your fingers always work really well to soften things. Whenever I'm painting any kind of design like this, it's always back and forth with layers. So, always take a step, especially towards the end of your painting, to step back and look at it and see where you feel like you need to reestablish some of the highlights or shadows, and you can always adjust them at this point.